Hello Traceable Designers. Today we're making the very easy single panel straight cornice style valance. This valance is hung using a 1-inch metal curtain rod with a continuous rod pocket. You will need to hang your curtain rod and then measure from the wall on the outside of the return across to the other return to get an exact measurement for this valance. When you size your fabric section, make sure any print is facing in the right direction. Then fold your fabric section in half with the back side facing out. My edge-to-edge rod measurement is 53.5 inches, so I'm going to round that up to 27, which would be 54 divided by 2, so I have a little extra room. I can always remove if I need to. The design form has the sizing lines or the height sizing lines there for the center and side panels for the cornice style valance, but we're making a custom valance that's a wraparound. So we're adjusting the rod pocket and the depth and the width. So I'm going to do a 13-inch long panel and then add the 4 inches for the 2-inch rod pocket. If your fabric has a straight factory edge on the top, you can skip this step. If not, you do need to straighten out your fabric on top before you begin to measure down for your rod pocket section. So position your design form on the folded edge, trace across the top, and slide across your fabric, continuing to trace. Then you'll just cut that top section off so it's nice and straight so you can measure down to mark off your rod pocket. So in this case, I'm beginning on my lower mark below my design, measuring up the 13 inches, and that is where I will place my mark so I know where my rod pocket section will begin. So since I have a straight edge on top, I can then measure down from the top down to my mark, and then I'll be able to do that across the fabric section for proper placement of the top edge of the heat and bond. Since I have a wide piece of fabric, it's going to be about 53 inches wide, 54 inches wide, I'm cutting sections of heat and bond to overlap. This way it's easier and it won't buckle. So I'm following along my marks. I've positioned my heat and bond across my top marks and then sized the bottom so that it doesn't overlap onto the ironing board. Then turn off the steam, use a medium-high heat, and then just continue to position your heat and bond across your marks, fusing that down, and then you'll go from the top down and out with a sweeping motion. Then you'll cut a second piece to overlap, or whatever number of sections that you need, until you've completely moved across your entire fabric section. The reason I'm using sections is I need to make sure that the heat and bond is positioned evenly across my marks. So you'll overlap about an inch or so and then fuse that in place, anchor it, and then you can cut off the bottom of that section and continue again across the top. So you want to align that across your marks and then a sweeping motion down and out. Now once that is completely cooled, you'll remove the top piece, which will be the farthest to the right, peeling that off, and then you'll move over to the other side where you can see it overlaps. You want to carefully pull that away so that you don't tear the glue off of your valance. Be really careful when you're removing your paper. You don't want that to gather because it will stick together, but you can pull that apart, but only if it's a small amount. So starting in the middle with your lining, you'll position that across the top of your glue mark, and you'll start in the center with a sweeping motion out toward the side. You want to continue to position your lining over the top edge of, or even with the top edge of the glue. So once I've anchored the middle here, I can turn it around, flip it over the ironing board, and pull it across like you would a large sheet. This makes it easier for you to keep that completely aligned with the top edge of the glue. So use a sweeping motion and continue to move the fabric section until you've completely finished adhering all of the lining to the back of your fabric section. Then once the lining is attached, then you'll fold the fabric section in half with the lining facing out, match up the top edge of the lining, and then pin to secure. And I'm measuring over 27 inches. Again, this is about a ½ inch more than I need. Can always remove it if it buckles, but I'd rather be safe with a wide enough panel rather than falling short. Then you measure from the top of your lining down the depth of your valance. Mine's 13 inches. So I'm staying over to the right here because that's where I'm positioning the design form, and I need the marks along the right and all the way along the bottom. Place a few there so you know how to slide your form to the left. And then you're going to start on the right hand side at the top edge of the lining and trace the right side of the design form. carefully following along the edge underneath the design form. Then double check to make sure it's lined properly across those marks on the bottom, so when you continue sliding left, it's always going to be completely straight. So you'll trace along the bottom of the design form, sliding all the way over to the folded edge, connecting all those marks, so you've marked the depth now and the width of your valance panel. At this point, you can make an adjustment to your rod pocket section. If you'd like to make it a little bit smaller, you can just measure up from your lining, mark across the top, and then trace across the top edge of the design form. So you'll finish tracing the right side so that you've traced up across your rod pocket section, and you can trace straight across the top and straighten that out if you need to, or if you'd like to make a different size. So then just position the panel with the folded side facing you, and then just carefully follow the traced line all the way around and up across the rod pocket section. Your rod pocket doesn't have to be 2 inches, it can be 3 or 4 or whatever you'd like. Now fold your fabric section over to meet the top edge of the lining, leaving a little space so you don't overlap onto the lining, and then just iron that to flatten. Then you'll cut a piece or strips of fusible backing to fit inside of that folded section. You don't want to overlap onto your lining or onto your ironing board, and you'll use as many strips as needed across your entire rod pocket. So just overlap the pieces and just continue along your rod pocket until it's completely covered with fusible backing. Once the backing has completely cooled, just carefully peel it off, and when you get to the overlap section, again, make sure you carefully remove that so you don't pull the glue off. Then you'll pull your rod pocket over onto your lining and make sure that's nice and straight at the edge of the top edge of the lining. Then just fuse that down across your rod pocket. Now you are going through several layers of fabric here, so this will take a little bit of time. You may need to press and hold a little bit, but do that always on the back, not the front of your fabric, and always just across the pocket. Once your rod pocket is finished, fold your fabric section in half evenly across the top to check the bottom to make sure it's perfectly straight. Now you can see here that I have a little bit of it's a little off on the bottom, so I'm cutting along there to remove that excess. You can also measure down from the top of your panel to the bottom to make sure it's perfectly even across the bottom. You don't want to take that for granted, so you measure down from the top, make sure it's straight. Next step, you're going to hang your valance to make sure it fits across the rod. If there's any buckling, you need to refold the fabric and cut that little excess off. Make sure you take just a tiny bit and then check it a second time. If it lays perfectly straight, you can skip this step. Be careful not to remove too much, or it will flare on the sides. So now we're ready to do the trim. I'm using a 3/8 inch braided gimp trim. It's easy to attach and it curves around the edges nicely. I've ironed down my panel to make sure it's nice and secured around the edges, and then just run your trim underneath the iron to make sure it's straight. Now I'm using Unique Stitch, which is a tube glue. It's easy to apply. So just go all the way down the side and then continue around the first curved edge. I like to continue around for the first section there. So extend above your panel, pull it nice and straight, and then just easily flatten that down, just pressing until it starts to hold. Then you'll curve the under section around your first curve, and you can keep going back over it before it dries to make sure it's nice and straight. But as long as you do just a real gentle curve or a real gentle pull, it'll be nice and straight for you. So once you finish the curve, you're going to go across the bottom of the valance, and this is a long piece, and I want to make sure I do it in long sections rather than little inch by inch, because if you try to do it that way, it can be wavy. So I go as far as I can, probably about 24 inches or so, and then I'll take the trim and pull it across the bottom, taut, and then just lay it down over top of the glue. This way I can use a sweeping motion over to the left and it's perfectly straight. So if you follow this process, you'll find that you can have a nice straight section of trim across the bottom of your valance. So I'm doing it in 2 nice big sweeps. Then I'll continue around my right side curve, up the side, and then secure the ends behind the valance on both sides. Your finished valance will be fully lined and professional looking. Slip the rod right into the rod pocket and you'll be ready to hang your beautiful new straight style custom cornice valance. Thank you for joining me, Traceable Designers, and remember, you can always make your mark with Traceable Designer.